We could be one of the first countries in the West to broadly regulate social media, with only Germany and Australia attaching legal addendums on the most extreme harmful content online. But is clamping down on communications platforms akin to mass censorship and regulatory overreach and a threat to individual liberty? Or is it perilously long overdue? Today, we really need to talk about online safety. Let's talk first to cybersecurity expert and former senior military intelligence officer, Philip Ingram Mbe. Philip, fantastic to have you on. Now, what's interesting is we do often talk about the social media platforms as if they've already existed, as if they're a human right. They're free to download, they're by and large free to use unless you are a company. But are they really all about freedom?
Well, you summed it up very well in your introduction. They're not about freedom, they're about making money. And the Facebook revelations have shown that. And they make money by exploiting the people that they've got on there for free. You rightly highlighted that those people are the commodities. And therefore, Facebook manipulates the commodities to make sure that it is appealing to advertisers and others who want to pay for its services so that it can get the outputs from them to continue to grow that advertising revenue. It's very, very dangerous indeed.
And how can social media platforms be exploited by nefarious characters, by criminals, by hostile actors? I mean, we think we're just having a chit-chat with people we knew at university, but there is a sort of sinister underbelly to all of this that coexists and is constantly being built.
Well, it is, and it's very subtle. We all remember adverts from our childhoods, and I'll not compare your childhood to mine because mine was many years before yours. But you can remember those adverts, and they stimulate a thought in your mind, and they stimulate you understanding the product. Because what that's doing is it's stimulating what's called the feel-good quartet of different chemicals in your brain: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. And they make you feel, you get this nice, warm, tingly feeling down your back whenever you hear a comforting advert. The same thing happens whenever your personal beliefs and your arguments are being reinforced by what you're seeing in social media, by adverts that pop up that just happen to be related to products that you're interested in, or your best friend's interested in, and you haven't had a chance to look at it yet. All of that doesn't happen by accident. It's being designed, and you came up with some of the phraseology that there is behind it, but the wider psychodemographic profiling that these platforms can do to really understand what someone's psyche is, can then very subtly be used to change people's beliefs, to change people's thinkings, and get them to do things that maybe, if they were rational and not being influenced, they wouldn't do.
I mean, up to date, because this is a virtual world, it's largely gone completely unregulated, almost as if it doesn't have to coexist with the same sort of law and order and social standards as the real world. I mean, that's very apparent when you see the behaviour of online trolls. But how imperative do you think it is to actually now try and harness and at least sort of control this cyber metaverse that's being created?
Well, the trouble is technology is moving so fast and legislation never keeps up with it. The current piece of legislation that covers all activity online is the 1990 Computer Misuse Act. Well, in 1990, Twitter and Facebook and TikTok and most of the things that we hear about today didn't exist. So this online harms bill is essential at trying to do that. But I think there's a wider piece here for society to try and understand. People will do things online that they wouldn't think twice about doing or even considering in the real world. And they don't realize that everything that's done online, anyone can access it. It doesn't matter how closed down you've got your profiles. There are people around the world who know how to access it and to get at it. And it's immutable. It never goes away. You can always find it. And therefore, I suggest to people that they apply the rule that if you're not going to do it in the front entrance to the local supermarket, if you're not going to say it to people that are coming through, if you're not going to behave in that way, if you're not going to have yourself dressed in the way that you're going to do it online, why do it online?
And when we think about things like Facebook, about Twitter, until it comes to election time, and then we seem to get extremely polarised, well, we're polarised all the time, not much thought is really given to what's going on. But how easily could social media platforms be harnessed or exploited as weapons of war?
Well, they are already, because we keep hearing Chief of the Defence Staff and the Secretary for Defence talking about the grey zone. And this is nothing new. This goes back to the 6th century Chinese philosopher and general Sun Tzu, who said, all warfare is deception, all deception is warfare. And if you can win a battle without having to fight, then that's the way that you should be prosecuting warfare. And that's what's happening in the modern information age, because things can be fed at you. And people are very quick at developing what I call self-misinforming groupthink. So you don't like the argument that's coming through on your Twitter feed or your other feed. So what you do is you mute or you block those that are against the messaging, the ideas that you've got, because you think, I disagree with them. They're just being trolls. They're being angry. But then all of a sudden your timeline's filled with people that are reinforcing your beliefs the whole way through. And you think, oh, well, then I have to be right. Everyone on my timeline is believing the same thing that I do. But they're only doing that because you're only keeping people in your timeline who think the same way as you. And that's easy to manipulate. Governments are manipulating it. Large corporations are manipulating it. And they're getting it to try and get you to do something, whether it be vote in a certain way, whether it be buy a certain product or invest in another way. You are being manipulated.
Thank you so much, Philip, for coming on. Sinister stuff and fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much. Philip Ingram, MBE there. Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Daria Kuss, Associate Professor in Psychology at Nottingham Trent University and a cyber psychology expert. Thank you so much for coming on. We've just heard Philip Ingram there talking about how social media could indeed be harnessed to manipulate populations, or at least portions of demographics, to behave in certain ways. But how powerful is the influence of our virtual world on our real world when it comes to our psychology?
Thanks a lot, Alex, for having me today. Now, I think you're posing a really important question, thinking about the virtual world and its impact on our reality. Now, the virtual reality is present in our everyday lives. I think there is very little differentiation anymore between what happens online and what happens offline. We are on social media on a regular basis. We're using technology in order to communicate, in order to engage with others, in order to do our shopping, to be entertained. We're using social media for any kinds of purposes. Technology use really has become the status quo. And I think we really need to understand it. It has become so deeply intertwined with our lives that we cannot imagine our lives without technology. And as a consequence, what we will see and what we are already seeing are a number of psychological impacts of technology use on our mental health and well-being. Some of them are very positive, but others, as the recent Facebook papers have shown, can be very, very negative in very many ways, detrimental to our psychological well-being, can have an impact on our levels of potential depression, anxiety, stress, addiction, which we've studied quite a lot here at Nottingham Trent University. And when we're thinking about young users, especially who are still in the process of development, where they're developing their brains, where they're developing their control mechanisms in their brains, they may be particularly vulnerable to the possible negative impact of excessive technology use. That's social media use, that's gaming, and a variety of other uses. And we really need to bear in mind that for some users, excessive use may indeed have very negative impacts on their lives.
Would it be fair to say that sort of substantive use of social media can indeed sort of start to essentially rewire you neurologically?
Yes, absolutely. So what we know from the research that has been done is that there are a number of associations between the kinds of relationships you see in terms of behavior and brain mechanisms that are involved in engaging with, on the one hand, particular addictive substances, but on the other hand, also with potentially addictive behaviors, such as the engagement in social media, the engagement in online gaming. So we know that on a neuroimaging level, so on a neurochemical level, there are a number of similarities where the limbic brain areas are being activated during continued use of technology, during continued use of social media, as well as gaming, where there are reward systems integrated within those technological platforms, reward mechanisms that trigger the reward centers in the brain, similar to those reward centers that are being triggered through the ingestion of a psychoactive substance. So we know that research is supportive of this. At the same time, we know that the brain is an organ that learns really quickly. We can condition it to learn to associate rewards experienced through the engagement with social media with actual happy feelings. So over time, the brain learns to associate, your social media use with some sort of a reward, and therefore it will be requesting the reward on a regular basis. This is how potentially problematic behaviors may be maintained over time. And for some individuals, this may mean that they may actually require professional help in order to be able to get out of potential addictive cycles as well. And that's one of the reasons for why I think it's really important for the social media industry as well as the gaming industry to make sure that the corporate social responsibility measures are indeed increased. We have written recommendations to the UK Government Select Committee, Digital Sport and Media to really make suggestions in terms of what can be done to improve the situation, and we need additional regulatory mechanisms, and we also need the industry to work together with independent research organizations to ensure that we have the objective data stemming from within their services to give us a very clear indication about what is it about those platforms that may be problematic and how can we potentially change them in order to benefit the users in a positive way.
Dr. Kuss, absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you for coming and giving a scientific perspective on this topic. We can speak now to Ian Corby, Executive Director at the Age Verification Providers Association, who joins me in the studio. Delighted to have you here, because something that has possessed me for a while now when it comes to social media and the World Wide Web in general is how vulnerable and exposed children are without proper protections. I mean, how much of a concern is this as we start looking at the online safety bill to make sure, not just in terms of the most hardcore content, such as adult material on porn sites, but even social media content? How do we protect youngsters?
Thanks very much for having me. There's a really famous cartoon showing two dogs playing on a laptop computer, and one looks to the other and says, "It's great. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog." And the problem we have on the internet is nobody knows if you're a child. The internet was never designed for children. So in order to preserve the freedoms of adults, but be able to protect children, the first thing we've got to do is figure out which users are adults and which are children. And so what age verification has grown up to do, originally focused mostly on the adult content industry, as you mentioned, but now increasingly, because of new laws that are coming through on GDPR, the data protection laws, and obviously the online safety bill, which we were just giving evidence this morning in Parliament about, there's a growing need generally to know the age or broad age range of users online.
I mean, why on earth has this not happened already? Because certainly when I was growing up, pornography was on a magazine behind an opaque cover at the top shelf of a newsagent. You had to be an adult to buy it. You even had to be an adult to reach it down from the top shelf, frankly. And yet today, material like that is available ubiquitously. And the age verifications they have in place, well, they're just rudimentary. Put in your birthday. Anyone who can do a basic sum could invent something. Why on earth have we basically allowed this to run rampant and are now trying to claw it back in today?
I think it's properly a question for government, but I do believe in 5 years' time, say, we'll look back on the days when we had no general age checks online, in the same way as we'd be completely incredulous if now kids could walk into a casino or a strip joint without being challenged on their age. Because you mentioned the meta-universe in your introduction. More and more of our life is going virtual and going online. And so all we are trying to do is make a very easy mechanism, a privacy-preserving mechanism, to allow us to apply those same norms that we've had for years in real society to our online lives.
And do we need to basically put these just on the most harmful content, or is this also about looking at social media? Because at one point Facebook were talking about bringing children's Instagram out. I mean, thankfully they seem to have ditched that prospect. Now they've been rather exposed as to realising their content can be extremely harmful to children. But I mean, would we need to put age verification on things such as Facebook and Instagram, which is supposed to remove harmful content anyway? Or is this just for those sites which are, very obviously adult by nature?
Well, the new bill before Parliament looks at proportionate implementation, where you take a look at the risk and then you decide what level of age assurance you get. You can have very hard age assurance, check a passport, or softer age estimation, where we use sort of facial analysis to guess your age within perhaps 1 or 2 years of accuracy. So I think it's a matter of getting it proportionate, because, of course, the more rigorous it is, the more disruptive it is to your online behaviour. And, of course, we want kids to use the internet because there's a world of opportunity out there. One thing the social media firms could do do today is to start checking when you say you turn 18 because you opened your account 5 years ago when you were 13, they could check that you are actually 18 today by doing a proper adult age verification check. Unfortunately, that would probably demonstrate quite how many 10-year-olds are signing up to those social media platforms today.
When I've brought up conversations like this in the real world with other people and say, you know, I personally think that it's crazy that the World Wide Web is the wild, wild west, that anything can go on there and, you know, there's no checks, no regulation, and it might be a parallel world, but my word, it can be a dangerous one. People say, oh, well, you know, if you put things behind age verification, if you try and regulate porn, then people are just going to make it. It's going to go on the dark web. Children will get it anyway. How watertight is the sort of technology that you will be able to offer and hopefully that people will be able to implement to protect children? Is it sort of porous, or does it have a complete...
Well, as I say, it's proportionate. So it might be that to buy a knife online, you want to have an extremely strict measure where even if you've proven your age last week, we'd still want to check your photo is the same photo as the ID we saw a week ago. But perhaps for accessing pornography, as long as you're roughly 18 or so, an estimation technique might be sufficient. So I think it's important to maintain that sense of proportionality when you apply this. And on that basis, it can be as strict as you want it to be. I would just think, for example, of my friend's daughter. My friend was telling me literally yesterday that she's got Net Nanny, she's got the stuff switched on for the ISP, she's tried everything possible, but her daughter has discovered search. And she searches for stuff and finds cartoons of stuff or things where bad words have been removed, so the search engine doesn't block those. And she's literally, the mum has had to go through and create a whole list of websites that she's blocking her 11-year-old daughter from accessing, but after the fact. So we need those platforms to be the ones taking responsibility to help mums and dads up and down the country by just checking that the children are old enough for the content that they're being shown.
And in creating this technology, have you found it really rather distressing or depressing to see the situation that we're in at the moment with the internet without any regulation?
Well, certainly I deal with the children's charities and they're extremely concerned about this. I think nobody's trying to take away the rights and freedoms of adults here. But if you take, for example, the advertising for high-fat, sugar and salt foods, the government said there can be no digital advertising because they don't trust the platforms to keep that advertising away from children. Now, if we had a more robust system where we could guarantee that audiences were adults and can make their own decisions about chocolate, then we wouldn't need these rather broad brush and draconian outright bans.